The movie starts with a gang of bikers called the Outcasts going to one of their clubhouses. The DEA is tracking them, but the gang goes inside where they have a meth lab. The gang is led by Danny, who talks to one of them named Phil Broker about transporting their drugs. They discuss the plan with Danny's son, Jojo. Suddenly, the DEA raids the place and starts arresting the gang members. The DEA's leader asks for an update on their undercover agent, who turns out to be Phil Broker. Danny realizes Phil is an informant and runs away with his son. Phil helps one injured agent, but as they leave, the place explodes. Danny runs away in a car and Phil gets on a bike to chase them. They come to a police roadblock, so Danny turns around. They end up face to face with Phil on the bike. Suddenly, Phil slides off the bike and shoots at it, causing the car to explode. Phil goes to the car to arrest Danny, and he shoots Jojo in the leg, so he drops his gun. Other agents arrive and tell Jojo to surrender, but he gets himself killed on purpose. Phil feels sad, but Danny blames him for his son's death. Phil leaves him feeling heartbroken. It's later learned that after working in different departments and closing his last case, Phil resigned from the police force. 2 years later, in a school, Phil's daughter, Maddy, is playing alone. Soon, a boy named Teddy Klum approaches and starts bullying her. He pushes her down, but she warns him twice before hitting him and breaking his nose. Phil moved to a small town in Louisiana, where Maddy's mother grew up. While doing some woodwork with his friend, Tito, Phil gets a call from Maddy's school. He rushes there and finds Teddy being treated by a nurse. In the principal's office, Teddy's parents are demanding justice, but Phil is approached by a teacher named Susan Hatch. Teddy's mother, Gator Bodine, tries to confront Phil, but the sheriff takes her away. Phil talks to Maddy and learns what happened. He blames himself for teaching her self-defense. Phil and Susan have a moment, and it's revealed that Maddy's mother recently passed away, and Phil moved to Louisiana because Maddy was interested in horse riding. As Phil leaves, Cassie sends her husband Jimmy to attack Phil to avenge Teddy. Jimmy confronts Phil, but Phil surprisingly takes him down, humiliating him in front of his family. The sheriff intervenes and tells Phil he's not in trouble. The sheriff questions how Phil managed to take down Jimmy, but Phil avoids the questioning, saying there won't be any more trouble. He meets Maddy, who tells him the teacher saw everything. Cassie leaves, insulting Jimmy, who tries to defend himself. Cassie says she'll take the issue to her brother to handle Phil, but Jimmy warns her to keep it in the family. Meanwhile, some gangsters are playing music and smoking drugs when they're interrupted by another drug dealer named Gator, who orders them to turn off the music and send the 17-year-old girl away. Gator hits one of the drug dealers and tells them not to cook meth again, even though they say it's for their own use, not distribution. Gator forces them all to leave, telling them he'll burn them if he finds them there again. At home, Phil praises Maddy for defending herself. She teases him about his thoughts on the teacher, Susan. Gator goes home and it's revealed he's Cassie's brother. Cassie asks Gator to threaten Phil and Maddy, and she also asks him for drugs since she's an addict. The next day, Phil spends time with Maddy and then goes to the school, where he asks Susan for help organizing Maddy's upcoming birthday party. Susan tells Phil to apologize to Teddy's parents to bring peace after the earlier fight. Phil goes to Jimmy's workplace and apologizes, and Jimmy asks him to apologize to Teddy and Cassie too, which Phil accepts. On his way home, Phil stops at a gas station to refill his car. Gator's men arrive and start provoking him, demanding the pump before he's done. One of them turns the pump off and forces Phil to pay, even though he wasn't finished. Phil ignores them and continues refilling, but the gang leader attacks him, leading to a fight. Phil quickly takes down all the men in a surprising way. After the fight, Phil asks who sent them, but the leader says no one did, and they leave. Gator hears the bad news at his meth lab. Maddy asks Phil about his hand, and he lies that he was working on something. The sheriff then signals Phil to stop and asks him to come talk. The sheriff then says that they heard about the incident at the gas station, but no one is pressing charges. The sheriff asks Phil if he's ex-military, but Phil doesn't want to talk about his past. The sheriff says he has Phil's attention. Gator goes to Phil's house, but Phil and Maddy are leaving to go horseback riding. Gator punctures Phil's car tire, seeing them leave with Maddy, not knowing they're there. Gator goes inside while Phil and Maddy are at a lake, remembering Maddy's mom. Maddy feels sad and tells Phil she misses her mom sometimes, and Phil tries to comfort her. Gator takes one of Maddy's stuffed bunnies while they're gone. Gator goes to a case store and finds files that tell him about Phil's past. He hears Phil and Maddy coming back, so he takes the files and hides, where he finds Maddy's cat. At night, Maddy asks Phil if he's seen her cat and bunny. Phil promises to help her look. Gator reads the files and learns about Phil's past connection to an outlaw group and his undercover mission that led to someone's death. Phil notices his tire is punctured. While searching for the cat, he finds the bunny doll cut up and tied to a tree. Gator calls his girlfriend, Mary, who used to be part of the outlaw group, and they meet in the morning. Gator tells Mary all of Phil's secrets, including that he was responsible for the death of the person from the gang. Phil approaches Jimmy and warns him to stay away from his house, thinking Jimmy was behind the damage. Gator wants to trade Phil to Danny in return for permission to sell meth in Danny's territory. Mary cautions Gator about the untrustworthiness of the outlaw group, but Gator insists on meeting Danny's lawyer to finalize the deal. Meanwhile, Phil replaces Maddy's damaged doll and plans to invite her entire class to her birthday party. Mary meets with Danny's lawyer and provides Phil's incriminating file. Danny instructs his lawyer to take any necessary action against Phil. During a reconciliation, Maddy invites Teddy to her birthday party. Later, Phil learns that rumors about his fight with Jimmy are spreading. Tito, Phil's associate, informs him about Gator's true identity as a meth cook disguised as a boat mechanic. The sheriff is aware but compromised by Gator. Tito warns Phil about Gator's location and advises caution. At Maddy's party, the outlaw group approaches Mary. Cyrus, their leader, demands to know Phil's whereabouts. Mary explains Gator's demands, but Cyrus forcefully insists on learning Phil's location. The birthday party ends and Maddy's happy to see her dad talking with Susan. At night, Gator visits Cassie to warn her to stay away from Phil, but Cassie asks Gator for drugs. Gator refuses, and they argue, with Gator telling Cassie to clean herself up and stop doing drugs while Teddy overhears them. Phil contacts his old DEA boss to get information on Gator and learns about Mary's recent work with Danny. Phil goes to the cafe Tito told him about, and Tito points out Gator. Phil confronts Gator, who blames Phil for hitting Jimmy and Maddy hitting Teddy. Phil warns Gator to stay quiet about anything he knows about Phil. Phil tells Gator it was a cowardly act to damage his car and Maddy's doll, and warns that the next person to trespass on his property will be killed. Gator denies the accusations. Phil leaves, but gets Mary's photo and realizes she's been with Gator. Phil goes to Gator's disguised meth lab and starts checking things around. As a former DEA agent, Phil identifies the items used for cooking meth and the processed meth. Phil then sets up an electronic bomb trap that will explode when the lights are turned on. As Phil leaves, he sees Maddy's cat, but when he tries to pick it up, one of Gator's men holds him at gunpoint. Phil manages to take the man down quickly. The cat runs away and Phil chases it. He gets hit by the man he had encountered earlier at the gas station. The men start torturing Phil, hitting him and drowning him, seeking revenge for what happened before. They taunt him, saying they'll go after his daughter since no one's protecting her now. Phil gets furious and fights back, finding ways to untie himself. Phil easily defeats the goons and knocks out their leader. He leaves with the cat, but the bikers are on their way. Maddy's upset to learn that they're moving, while Cyrus and his gang have reached Gator's place, asking for Phil's location. Gator promises to give them the directions, though he doesn't want to be directly involved. The gangsters head towards Phil's home by water, while Tito arrives to help Phil with the horses. Tito hears strange sounds and confronts one of the men, leading to a fight. The man overpowers Tito, but is then stabbed with a garden fork. Phil is packing to leave, but the gangsters have arrived near his house. Tito tries to alert Phil, getting shot in the hand. Phil hears the shot, calls Maddy, and tells her to hide. Phil gets a gun and prepares to face the gangsters who are hunting for him. Two of the gangsters move into the main entrance, but when they open the door, Phil shoots one of them down, and a fight breaks out inside of the house. Maddy's noticed and runs to the woods to save herself. Mary calls Gator to tell him things have gotten messy, but Phil is still fighting the gangsters. One of the goons chases Maddy through the woods, but Phil shoots him before he can hurt her. Cyrus then engages Phil, and Maddy runs to the store, where she meets Mary. Mary tries to persuade Maddy to leave with her, and a fight breaks out between Cyrus and Phil. Phil gains the upper hand and defeats Cyrus, but then Mary kidnaps Maddy and leaves with her, despite the police arriving at the scene. Phil reports the incident to the sheriff and then finds the injured Tito, calling for an ambulance. Maddy calls Phil and describes where she is, and the police track her phone. Mary and Maddy reach Gator's place, and when Maddy describes it, Phil recognizes it and heads there. Gator gets angry at Mary for being a witness to his place and threatens to kill her, but then Cassie and Jimmy arrive, asking about the shooting. Cassie tells Gator that Maddy has been reported missing and asks if he's involved, but Gator denies seeing Maddy. Mary takes Maddy out, but Cassie hears her voice and investigates. When Cassie turns on the lights, she triggers Phil's trap, causing an explosion that destroys Gator's lab. Cassie tries to help Maddy, but Gator gets angry and shoots Cassie in the stomach, and then takes Maddy with him. As Gator drives away, Phil arrives and starts chasing him on the highway. The chase continues, with Phil trying to save Maddy, but Gator drives faster and gets away. The police try to block Gator's escape, but he manages to flee over a bridge, where Phil's car crashes. Gator gets out to approach Phil, but the sheriff orders his men not to shoot because Maddy's in there. Maddy distracts Gator, and Phil uses that opportunity to attack Gator. He beats Gator up, then holds a gun to his head. But Maddy convinces Phil to spare Gator's life. The paramedics help Cassie, and Phil and Maddy leave the scene. The movie ends with Phil visiting Danny in prison, just to warn him that he'll be waiting as soon as he gets out.